Hello, my name is Karen Giblin, and this spring marked the 40th anniversary of my arrival to Spring Glen Church. In fact, I believe I still hold the record for the youngest person to have attended church here at 3 days, 10 hours, and 7 minutes old. So a great many of you may feel that you know me pretty well. But today, I am here to tell you about the 3 things that I know I struggle with. Number 1, finance discussions. The ADHD gremlin in my brain hears any of a number of finance buzzwords and just starts bouncing off my cranial walls. Number 2, asking for help. I know I'm not alone on this. Number 3, organizing my thoughts into writing. See aforementioned ADHD gremlin. What you might not know is that as membership steward, convincing people to pledge falls under my jurisdiction. That's right, 3 for 3 on the things I struggle with most. But I actually chose this role for myself. When the church morphed its leadership structure just over a year ago, I had been head of the nominating committee, so the onus fell on me to see that the role of membership steward was filled by someone thoughtful and capable. Why on earth would I allow myself to fall into this role? Well, sometimes part of belonging means being a team player. Take the PTA, for example. This year I stepped into the role of president for our school's PTA after having accidentally taken the role of vice president for the 2 previous years. That's a story for another day. Because the bylaws demand that the president be someone who had already sat on the executive board for at least 1 term, the burden of taking this on fell squarely on my shoulders. I know that what the PTA does, especially in a school at which so many of the students come from economic instability, is essential for giving these kids opportunities they might not get otherwise. Using my privilege to advocate for those without is a value that I learned right at Spring Glen Church over my 40 years here. Are there things I'd rather be doing than running meetings, attending every school event, and setting budgets? You'd better believe it. But if I don't, who will? I want my school community to be educated, well-rounded, and loved. Not just for what it will do for me, but for what it will do for them, as well as the ripple effect it can have in the greater world. This church is no different. While you're here for your own spiritual fulfillment on a Sunday morning, and the idea of hearing about money in the same hour in the same space can be jarring or off-putting, the work of the church goes beyond the sermon and the music. We are not a consumer product where you pay for the service you personally receive. We are quite intentional about making the church community a welcoming place for people from every background, and that will never change. But the truth of it is that we do need to ask people to put some real thought into what they as a family or an individual can honestly afford to pledge to the church. We've talked for years about working our way up to budgeting for a full-time associate pastor, and while we like the idea of doing it and think we should pursue it, the bystander effect makes it too easy to look around on a Sunday morning and assume that the bulk of the financial onus to support our ideas of growth will probably fall to someone else, perhaps somebody we think will benefit from the service more than we will. But if everybody thought that way, where would our church be? Like an effective PTA, it takes leaders to step up and do what needs to be done, even when it requires some level of personal sacrifice to do it. Pledging information here at Spring Glen Church is extremely confidential. The only ones who see names attached to numbers are our treasurer and our trustee. And while they remain hopeful, the truth comes down to a few key facts that may help inform your pledging decisions this year. Number 1, pledges represent about 90% of the church's income in a given year. The 8 pledging units that give the most money represent $120,000, about 20% of our church's annual operating budget. Of those 8 pledging units, 7 of them are ages 65 plus. What will the budgeting process look like 30 years from now? Number 3, the expected pledges in a given year necessarily start out from a deficit. Some people can no longer pledge to the church for one reason or another. Let's say a previously expected pledge of around $5,000 can no longer be expected. That would take 5 other pledging units raising their pledges by $1,000 just to cover that one departure. Number 4, expenses can be counted upon to increase by 3 to 5% each year, but taking into account lost pledges, the remaining pledges increasing by that 3 to 5% will still mean we come up short of the bare minimum required just to stay as we are. Now, one of the biggest lessons I have tried to instill in my kids is that hard is not the same as impossible. Granted, in their case, that means things like surviving a car ride home before getting a snack or slogging through a 4-sentence writing assignment. But the lesson applies to the goals of the church as well. We can not just survive, but thrive. But doing so is going to require a great many of us to take one for the team and step up our pledges in a meaningful way. Can I count on you to be the player our team needs?